Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Lawrence Yo from More to That, and welcome. Welcome to another video reflection. I am super glad you're here. Thanks for joining me. And shortly, we're going to get into the topic of this video, which is on the performative self. But before I do that, I want to announce something. I talked about it on the newsletter, and I've been really talking about it off the rooftops. But my storytelling course, Thinking in Stories, is now open for enrollment. Yes. Yes. Um, Man, I've been working on this thing for months now. So I announced it in late April. I've been working on it even before then, but it's finally ready for enrollment. The beta cohort starts on October 25th. And this course really is a distillation of all my years as a storyteller into 3 weeks, and taking all that experience and really making it compact, compressing it into something that is digestible, informative, and just fun to experience. And really, the core idea here is that storytelling, it's not a solitary experience, right? I mean, the very definition of the word storytelling, to tell, and then someone listens and you give feedback. But oftentimes, as storytellers, we don't really get that kind of communal vibe from it. So what this course really blends is that communal element where you have feedback and you get to share your stories, workshop ideas together, that piece. But also the other piece, which really is still important, is that personal reflection piece where you get to digest those ideas, those things that you've talked about, those discussions, and then parse apart your best ones and then structure that result into a narrative that resonates. So it's this optimal blend of both these things that I've really worked hard on incorporating within this course. And another thing too is that these days, the best stories are not just the most informative or insightful ones, right? That may have worked a while back, and those are the stories that really ground us today. But in today's age, there's another component to storytelling, which is that it also has to be fun. It really does. And I think that this element of fun is truly important, especially in an era where attention spans are really short. And I'm not saying that you have to cater to a short attention span, but you also have to imbue your ideas with something that makes that kind of inner child in someone want to go deeper with you into whatever you're presenting, right? Because that's one of my fundamental beliefs, is that we all have an inner child that is still delighted by certain things like an illustration or a chart or a graph or certain visuals or metaphors or analogies that really pop and resonate. These things are really, really important. And I really focus on that a lot in this course as well, and really walk through how to do that, how to simplify your ideas, how to imbue or inject it with fun, and then how to really structure that into a way that will bring people towards that story. Like they'll almost have no choice but to look at it at least and gravitate and see what goes on there. So this is kind of what I've taken with my process really, and tried to distill it into something concrete. And I think that this is something that really, to me, it's really helped me understand why I do the things I do. Because as a creative, sometimes you just think that, oh, one day I just woke up and this was my process, because it's so gradual, right? But when you sit down and actually parse through your process, you realize that, oh, wow, there's this idea. Actually, there's a framework here. And this framework is not just for myself, but it could be communicated to many others. And that's something that I've really worked to do with this, is that to build frameworks around this that actually is practical and actually could be very interactive to utilize together. So really, if you believe in the power of storytelling and just the fact that this really can be a communicable skill that could be grown with a community, then I'd love for you to join in the experience. I will put a link, like the YouTubers, like here or here, or if it's not there, it's like down there in the description. It'll be somewhere on the real estate of this video, but feel free to check it out. And if it's for you, I would love for you to join. The beta cohort is now open for enrollment. Seats are limited, so I encourage you to join today. Okay, I'm going to take a little water break. All right, and now let's delve into the meat of today's video, which is on the performative self. Now, this is a concept or this is a term that I kind of just thought of myself, but it is inspired by a work of a sociologist I recently got into named Irving Goffman. And he wrote a book called let me just check it out here, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And it was published in the 1950s. And the premise, or not the premise, but one of the central concepts of this book that really took off was Goffman's idea that we are all actors in a play, in a theater, when we interact with others. That we always are putting on some performance or some version of ourselves that is specifically tailored to who you are speaking with or interacting with. So he provides this analogy, and this is great because I just thought of this now. Like, this is another reason why this idea took off, right? It has a wonderful analogy built into it and a metaphor. It's just great storytelling. Okay, going back to the idea. So his idea is that, actors, there's these three particular components to being in a theater, right? You are either on stage, obviously, you are backstage, or you are off stage. Now, let's get into those three things briefly. When you're on stage, of course, you're performing. There's an audience there watching you, and you're either playing a character, you're playing a role, or something that caters to the audience's entertainment or to their approval or to their receptivity, right? So when you think about how you interact with someone on a day-to-day basis, right? Let's just say you're talking to someone and you're trying to explain an idea. You're just talking. And sometimes you might think, shit, I'm rambling, right? And then you tell the person, sorry, I'm rambling at this point. Now, why? Why do you say that, right? Well, you say that because you understand at that moment that you're not just talking to yourself. You're not just thinking to yourself. You actually have an audience here in terms of the person you're conveying your thoughts to. And if it starts sounding long-winded, that might be okay just for yourself if you're just sitting down thinking, or you're writing in a diary or journal, or you're just talking out loud. But when there's a live audience in front of you in the form of a person, you actually have to kind of start thinking about that person's attention and whether or not you are catering to it well enough, right? And that right there is what I would refer to as a performance. Even though it's not a grand performance, but a performance in itself is something like you playing a role that is outside of who you are authentically, or who you are when no one's looking. And I think we all have that to some extent. I think, and on the kind of severe extent, there's things like social anxiety, where someone just in front of you, and I've written about this extensively. I have a 2-part series on anxiety. I don't know if I haven't really put it out there, but this is probably the most comprehensive series I've ever written. But it's called You Are Not Your Anxiety. You can check it out. And the second part is called How to Calm the Anxious Brain. It's really long, but I put a ton of research and thought into it. But basically with social anxiety, it's like there's someone that approaches you, or you're in conversation with someone, and all your attention is on what this person is thinking, right? And at this point, you are nothing but a character act, or you have to just you feel this immense pressure that you have to perform so that this person likes you, doesn't think you're stupid, and so forth. So, but then on the more minor end, you just have just general oh yeah, I'm talking to someone, and then you just kind of there's this inkling here that perhaps you're talking in a way that you normally wouldn't if you were completely just comfortable, 100% comfortable, or you were just by yourself. And there's no one judging you or watching you, right? I mean, this could even be down to let's say you have a conversation with a relative, and it's a relative that you're close to, but not too close to, there's always this, hey, yeah, what's been going on? That kind of thing, and that kind of thing it points to the performative self, where you're on stage. And of course, there's a whole dynamic of being at work. When you're at work, there are characters, there's actors here, your boss is the director, or when you're talking to your boss, you have to be a certain thing, present yourself in a certain way It's all about approval, making sure you don't sound dumb, right? It's not an easy space to experiment with ideas. So that's the performative self. And then we talked about this a little bit before, but Goffman talks about the backstage, right? The backstage is when the actor is just in the green room, completely by herself, just chilling, nothing going on, everything is fine. Maybe she just pulls out her phone or like everything is relaxed. And he would say that's who the actor is at the baseline level. When no one is watching, that's who that person really is. And that's kind of, who we all are. So when we're backstage, it's when we don't have any work obligations. We don't have to put on a certain face or a certain attire or a certain appearance. That is what it means to be off stage or backstage. Now, the third thing is off stage, where kind of talks about, and I'm still kind of wrapping my head around the idea, but I think his general sentiment is that the actor is now off stage, like, how after the performance is done, like she gets to meet with the fans and like sell merch or something, or just like have a what is that called, meet and greet kind of thing. Like in that case, as the fan, that this actress is, is not really in character anymore, but that they could play that character, that they still are that character in some sense. But now when you get to meet them briefly, you want to get to know them as a person, right? It's a big clusterfuck, really, of dynamics. But I guess like a quintessential example here is like, let's say your boss takes you out to lunch, right? And you go to lunch, you're sitting there with your boss, and that this person, he's still your boss, and you're just having this dynamic. And then you're kind of thinking, oh man, like, yes, this is an opportunity for us to get to know each other personally, but you can't really do it as homies and as friends because, this person is still your boss. So there is like this performative element you still have to play, right? Like that's a good example of being off stage. So why am I thinking about this? Why am I thinking about the performative self? Well, it's because this really plays a central role, I think, as a creator. And because as a creator, we are constantly making stuff and creating things that represent who we are and the way that we think, but are not who we are and what we think at the same time, right? So let's take one example. Let's say if you've ever posted something on Twitter, right? There's a character limit on Twitter, 240 characters, I believe. And like you could even check out my Twitter right now at more to that, and you'll see that, okay, the way that I'm writing tweets is not the way that I talk really in real life, right? Like this is how I talk in real life. This video is a little over 13 minutes long, and I'm just explaining one concept. Whereas if I was on Twitter and I would have to explain the performative self, I would just say something like, we are all actors on a stage, and we have to understand when we are just acting and what is real life. Something like that, right? But I don't talk like that. I know I don't talk like that. But when I'm on that medium, I have to reframe, or I have to restructure my thoughts into this kind of performance that projects what I think or what I create. And that is very obvious on a platform like Twitter, but it's kind of less obvious in other things. Like let's say even with a blog, for example, it's like I'm writing a lot of my thoughts. I'm writing a lot of these kind of deeper thoughts that I have, but even what I put on there is not who I truly am, right? I mean, it's definitely a great not surrogate, but like a projection of how I think about the world. But there's so many things that I think about and go through on a day-to-day life that is not captured on More to That, right? I mean, for example, I don't write about what I do on the weekends when I'm hanging out with my wife and my daughter, or when I'm just playing with my daughter on any given day. And these things are very important to who I am as a person, but I don't really write about it much. Does that mean that that part of my life is just something that I just don't want out there or something? No, it's just that when it comes to what I write about on More to That, it just doesn't feel like it's something that I it really fits that kind of criteria, or the on-stage performance of that blog, really, right? And this really applies to everybody. I mean, and then you take this video, for example, even though this is really just me talking, and like I said before, these are unedited, I just kind of spiel out. But even this, like, I had to set the camera up, I had to set the microphone up, and, get ready for this, type a few notes. There is still a performative element going on in what I'm creating here. So that is something that, and see, like, my wife just popped in right there, and, like, that element of, oh no, I gotta do this now. So this is all part of, like, this kind of creative performance. That's all integrated here. So anyway, getting kind of back to what Goffman was saying, or actually what the general sentiment of the performative self is, I think that the important thing to realize here is that to understand that there is a gap between who you are authentically and who you are when you're performing, right? Because if you don't think that, then you start getting way too attached to that performative self, to that creator persona of who you are, right? And that right there is, it could be very alarming if it's unchecked, right? And the thing here is that there are pockets of the self. And just like there are pockets of who you don't talk to your boss in the same way that you would talk to your partner, the same thing happens in the creative realm, right? Is that what you put out there creatively is not exactly who you are when you're just by yourself. And that way you don't get attached to these personas. And also you can start kind of questioning, like, hey, am I being as authentic as I can be with what I create out there? Or at this point, am I just making stuff for an audience? And when I make stuff for an audience, how does that change the nature of what I'm building? And how does that change the nature of how I perceive myself? What is a performance and what is not? And it's very important, in my opinion, to keep track of that or keep inventory of that. There is a really good short story by Jorge Luis Borges. First of all, if you don't know about Borges' work, just straight off the bat, buy his book Ficciones. I hope I pronounced that right. It's just amazing. So he writes more philosophical fiction, but he's written classics, Library of Babel, Garden of Forking Paths. I think that's what it's called. I don't know the exact title, but he's just written so many great things. And he actually has a short story. I don't think it's in Ficciones, but you could just Google it. It's called Borges and I. Just put Borges and I PDF. It will take you 2 minutes to read, maybe even less than that. It's just 3 paragraphs long. And I love this story because it just really puts this whole performative self element in play, where he talks about, like, at this point, he's an acclaimed writer. He's fairly famous. And, he's getting all these invitations for stuff, and he sees his name on the mail, and he just looks at it with this distance. Like, he sees his name, Borges, and he's just kind of like, who is this guy? Right? Who is this guy writing these stories, getting all this acclaim, and, like, having his work be interpreted by all these different people, almost to the point where it's not even his own work anymore. And little old me, the I part of Borges and I'm just here. I like typography. I like hourglasses. I like all this. I have these, like, really personal likes that are, really imbued into probably, like, back into my childhood and stuff. And I feel like this part of me, this is who I really am. Not this, like, Borges that's, like, spinning out these crazy stories and getting all this acclaim. And, like, there's a distance there. And he says that he used to write stories about, like, the translation says suburbs, but I think it's more of, like, he used to write stories about people in slums and those kind of stories about what it's like to live there. And then he made a pivot towards writing these, like, philosophical mindfuck stories about time and identity, epistemology, all these things. And, now that, like, that part of himself has really taken off, and it just doesn't feel like he has control over it anymore. So what do you do next? Do I have to go do something else? Do I have to refine myself to regain that identity. So it's just a really Borges story, and he does it so well. He compressed it so well. And at the end of the story, he writes, "I'm not even sure which one of me has written this story." It's just beautiful, right? Like, is it still this Borges guy who has to always think in writing these crazy stories that has to write this piece? Do I have to end it with this mindfuck sentence, which he does again in this story? Or is it just me trying to really get my thoughts out about, man, this dilemma that I'm in? And this is one of the best stories that I've read about just how the performative self could cause this kind of dilemma and this tension within you if you don't monitor it closely, or if you're not aware that, hey, when I'm creating things, this also is a performance, and I should treat it as such. I should see it as such and not get too attached to it. So, all right, 21 minutes in, man, one take that you got everything. I talked about thinking in stories. I talked about the performative self. Had some Goffman in there. I'm once again, this is thinking out loud, and I am just really happy to do this. I would love to hear what you think. I'd love to hear how you internalize this performative self, if it's something that you think about or have noticed about yourself as well. And once again, I will hear from you soon, and I will talk to you later. Thanks again for tuning in. All right. Bye.